Montana Territory, 1872. The rain had not touched the soil in weeks, and the sun beat down like it wanted to bury the land in dust. But even in the dry silence of the prairie, the townsfolk of Dry Willow whispered louder than thunder. "They say she brings death. I heard her husband froze to death with her standing right there. No family, no past, just bad luck following her like a shadow." That was what they said about Delaney Ember, except they never said it to her face. She stood at the edge of town with her faded satchel, boots worn thin, and eyes that held both fire and ruin. Her black hair was tied back with a strip of cloth, and her dress was clean but patched at the elbows and hem. She had nothing but her name and the two children clinging to her hands, twins, maybe 7 years old, a boy and a girl, both hollow-eyed and silent. They had been on the road 3 days since the last town turned them out. The children were not hers by birth, but they may as well have been by now. Their real mother had died on the trail to Helena, and their father had vanished into the hills chasing silver. Delaney had found them half-starved, huddled near a burned-out wagon. She fed them, protected them, and they never let go of her after that. The sheriff of Dry Willow, a short, red-faced man named Curtis, narrowed his eyes when she asked if there was work. "No handouts here," he said. "Best keep moving. Folks here do not take kindly to cursed women." Delaney's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She turned, ready to walk on. That was when a voice stopped her. "I got work." Delaney looked up and saw a man on horseback just beyond the post office porch. He was tall, maybe 30, with sun-browned skin and a rangy frame built from years of hard riding. His shirt was rolled to the elbows, and his hands were scarred from labor. There was something quiet in his gaze, like he had seen too much and spoke only when it mattered. "My ranch is 20 miles west," he said. "You can cook, clean, help with the herd." "Then I got work." Delaney studied him, uncertain. "You do not know me." "I do not need to." The children clung tighter to her. The boy's lip trembled. The girl had not spoken all day. "What is your name?" Delaney asked. "Silas Alder." She watched him for a beat longer, then nodded once. "Delaney Ember. These two are Naomi and Nalan. They stay, or I do not go." Silas looked at the children. "They stay." He waited while she gathered her things, then helped her into the saddle behind him. The children nestled on a mule tied behind. No one else in town said a word. No one stopped them. They rode out under the wide Montana sky, the wind dry and warm, the sun slipping behind the hills. Silas did not talk much. Neither did Delaney. But something settled in her chest on that ride, something she had not felt in a long time. Not safety, not yet, but the edge of it. Silas's homestead was a stretch of land tucked into the fold between two hills, with a creek winding along the back fence and a barn that leaned slightly, as if listening to the wind. The house was small but solid, made of timber with chinked stone along the base. Inside, it smelled of cedar and tobacco. There were 2 bedrooms, a stove, and a table built by hand. "You can take the front room," he said. "I sleep in the barn most nights anyhow." Delaney looked at him. "You live out here alone?" His face did not change. "Used to have a brother. He died 5 winters ago. I stayed." She nodded and said nothing more. That night, Delaney cooked cornbread and beans. Naomi fell asleep on a quilt near the fire. Nalan clutched a carved wooden horse Silas had left on the shelf, his eyes heavy. Silas sat at the table, quiet, watching. "You do not believe what they say?" Delaney asked, her voice low. "I believe folks say a lot when they are scared of what they do not understand." She looked down at her hands. "I buried a husband, then a child, then another. I tried to help a family once and they lost everything. Every place I stay turns to ash." Silas leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "You think that is your fault? I do not know what I think anymore. He tapped his fingers once, thinking, "You did not leave those kids behind." That tells me more than any story. Delaney blinked, sharp and fast, and turned away before he could see the tears. In the weeks that followed, the land began to soften. The children started to laugh again, quiet at first, then bright. Naomi helped Delaney hang laundry while Nalan followed Silas into the fields, carrying a small pail and asking questions about cows. Silas built them a swing from an old rope and a plank. He repaired the roof. He dug a second garden bed for vegetables. Delaney worked harder than anyone Silas had ever seen. She patched shirts, fixed the door hinges, and read to the children by lamplight. And every night when the house fell still, Silas would find himself leaning in the kitchen doorway, listening to her hum as she braided Naomi's hair or tucked Nalan in. He had not meant to care. But one morning he saw her standing barefoot by the creek, her dress fluttering in the breeze, her face turned toward the rising sun, and something inside him just settled. She turned and saw him. "You are staring." Silas shrugged, stepping closer. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how everything around here feels different since you came." Delaney's breath caught. "Different how? Like it is whole." She looked at him, really looked. "Even with the stories they tell about me." "I do not listen to stories. I watch people." Their eyes held, and then, for the first time in years, Delaney smiled. Not polite, not guarded, just real. That night she sat on the porch while Silas repaired a saddle. The children were asleep. The sky was full of stars. She leaned her head against the post and whispered, "No one ever built anything around me before, not a home, not even a fire." Silas set the leather down and looked over at her. "Then I guess it is about time someone did." He did not touch her, not yet. But there was something building between them, solid as oak, quiet as a prayer. And neither of them turned away from it. A frost came early that year. It crept in one morning just before dawn, lacing the barn rafters with white and stiffening the creek until the water moved slow and heavy. Delaney stood at the stove in her shawl, coaxing heat from the firebox while Naomi and Nalan dressed themselves by lantern light. The house was quiet but full, like the hush between verses in an old hymn. Silas had already been out since before first light. She saw the shape of him through the frost-glazed window, hauling chopped wood toward the shed. His breath curled in the air and his movements were steady, deliberate. Nalan tugged at her sleeve. "Can I help him today?" She set a tin plate down and handed him a biscuit. "After you eat. And only if you wear your scarf." Naomi reached for the kettle, careful, and poured herself a cup of warm milk. Delaney watched her and nodded. "You're getting strong." "I want to be," Naomi said, and her voice didn't waver. By mid-morning, the frost had loosened its grip, and Delaney stepped out into the yard. The wind had teeth in it, but the sun was climbing and the sky had cleared to a hard blue. She found Silas near the corral, mending a stretch of fence that had bowed under a fallen branch. "I wasn't expecting winter so soon," she said, brushing bark from the fence rail. He glanced up. "It's early. Might be rough this year." She crouched beside him and steadied the post while he drove the nails. "You've done all this yourself since your brother passed, most of it." He straightened and wiped his hands. "Mrs. Hanby from town used to help with the garden before she moved back east. Other than that, just me." She nodded once, then looked past the fence toward the hills. "You ever think of leaving?" He shook his head. "This land's the last thing that still feels like it's mine." They didn't speak for a while after that. The wind pressed through the grass and a hawk circled high above the ridge. Silas leaned on the fence rail, his jaw working like he was weighing something he hadn't said aloud before. "When I was 16, he said slowly, "my brother and I tried to ride to Missouri, thought we'd find work with cattle drives headed south. We got caught in a flash flood near the Little Bighorn. He pulled me out, lost the horse, nearly lost his leg. He looked over at her. He stayed after that, said the land needed watching. Delaney listened, her gaze steady. I never told that to anyone before, he said. Why now? Because you're not going anywhere. She didn't answer right away. She reached down, adjusted the tension on the fence wire, then stood. Neither are you. That night, after the children were asleep, Delaney sat by the fire with a length of cotton and a threaded needle. She was stitching a new hem into Nolan's coat, her fingers moving with quiet precision. Silas came in without a word, brushed snow from his shoulders, and hung his coat near the door. I checked the lower pasture, he said, settling into the chair across from her. Found fresh tracks. Probably elk. You going hunting? He nodded. We'll need meat before the first deep snow. She folded the fabric, her thumbs smoothing the seam. You want company? He looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. You know how to shoot. I know how to follow. And I don't spook game. He leaned back, his gaze steady. Then I'd welcome it. They left before sunrise the next morning, riding out with the frost still clinging to the brush. Delaney rode a buckskin mare with a calm gait, the rifle slung behind her saddle. Silas led them along a narrow trail that cut through pine and birch, the silence between them easy. They didn't speak much on the trail. But when they reached the ridge and dismounted, when they crouched in the snow and watched the small herd grazing below, something shifted. Silas handed her the rifle. Take the one by the rock, second from the left. It's clean and it won't run far. Delaney steadied the barrel, her hands were calm. She pulled the trigger and the elk dropped, no stumble, no panic, just stillness. Silas looked at her sideways. You weren't guessing. She handed the rifle back. I only shoot when I have to. They dressed the elk together, worked in silence, blood warming their hands against the snow. When they were done, they loaded the meat onto the pack mule Silas had brought for the purpose. Riding back, the sun caught the frost on the trees and lit the pines gold. Delaney looked over at him. You've never asked, she said. About what? What I lost. He didn't answer right away. Then, I figured you'd tell me if you wanted me to know. She nodded, quiet for a while. The first was a girl, barely old enough to walk, took fever in Kansas. Then a boy born too early, never breathed right. The last was a man who said he'd build me a house and died before he could finish the roof. Silas didn't look at her. He just rode steady, his hands loose on the reins. You're still building, he said. She swallowed. I don't know how to stop. Good, he said. Neither do I. By the time they reached the house, the sky had turned lavender and smoke curled from the chimney. Naomi was waiting on the porch, wrapped in her shawl, Nolan asleep on a pile of blankets beside her. Delaney dismounted and gathered Nolan into her arms. Naomi took her hand as they walked inside. Silas followed, carrying the elk meat on his shoulder. That evening, as snow began to fall in soft, slow flakes, Delaney looked across the table at him, her hands wrapped around a warm cup, and said quietly, I never thought I'd want to stay in one place again. Silas didn't smile. He just reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Not as a promise, not as a question, just as something steady, and she didn't pull away. The wind came down from the north with a sharper edge by late November. It rattled the bare branches and pushed smoke sideways from the chimney, and the sound of it moving through the cottonwoods gave the land a hushed, listening quality. Inside the house, Naomi sat cross-legged on the floor by the hearth, reading aloud from an old primer, her voice halting but determined. Nolan traced shapes in the ash with a stick, his face slack with concentration. Delaney sat at the table, patching the knees of Naomi's winter dress, the needle slipping through the fabric with practiced ease. Silas came in with a dusting of snow on his shoulders and a leather pouch slung across his chest. "You take the creek trail?" Delaney asked without looking up. He nodded, setting the pouch on the table. "Fewer drifts that way. Picked up salt and lamp oil from the trading post. Also ran into Reverend Pike." She raised her eyes, cautious. "He say anything?" Asked if you'd take over the schoolroom for winter session. "Miss Travers married a wheelwright out of Bozeman and left last week." Delaney set the needle down slow. "He knows folks won't like it. He said he doesn't care what folks like. Said they need someone who can read and keep order, and the children already follow your voice." She folded the patch against the dress. "I'll consider it." Silas leaned against the wall near the stove, arms crossed. "You'd be good at it. I'd be watched. You already are." She glanced toward the children. "It's not just about me, I know." She stood and walked to the cupboard, her jaw tight. "I taught once in Abilene before everything shifted. It didn't end well." Silas didn't press her. He just waited, still and steady the way he always did when she was weighing something that hurt to hold. She turned back, voice low. "But maybe it's time I held my head up again." That night after supper, Naomi asked to sleep in Delaney's room. The wind was louder than usual, and Nolan had been having dreams he wouldn't talk about. Delaney let them both curl under the quilt beside her, their small bodies warm and twitching with sleep. She didn't rest right away. She lay staring at the ceiling until the fire settled into soft coals, then rose and stepped out onto the porch, careful not to wake them. The air was bitter, but the sky was clear, the stars high and sharp. Silas was sitting on the top step, coat pulled close, hat tipped back. He didn't look up when she joined him, just shifted slightly so she could sit beside him. "I keep waiting for this to fall apart," she said quietly. He rubbed his palms together. "Why?" "Because peace like this doesn't usually last where I'm standing." He turned his head. "Then maybe you've been standing in the wrong places." She looked at him, the lines of his face gentled in the starlight. "You don't ask for much. I ask for what matters." He paused. "You." Her breath left her in one long, shaken exhale. "I don't know how to be wanted like that." "You don't have to know," he said. "You just need to stay." She reached for his hand, her fingers cold but sure. "I'm trying." He curled his hand around hers. "That's enough." The next morning, she walked to the whitewashed schoolhouse with Naomi and Nolan, her boots crunching over snow still crusted from the night freeze. She unlocked the door with the iron key Reverend Pike had pressed into her palm and stepped into the single-room space with its narrow desks and chalkboards smudged with last year's lessons. By the end of the week, she had 10 children under her care: ranchers' sons, fur trappers' daughters, and 2 boys from a Lakota woman who lived west of the ridge and spoke better English than most of the mothers in town. The townsfolk kept their distance, but their children came, boots slushing through snow, eyes bright with questions. Delaney taught them how to sound out syllables and measure land by paces. She brought Naomi and Nolan with her every day, and they walked home in the pink light of evening, her voice soft with stories as they crossed the field. Silas watched all of it from the place he kept behind his eyes, never saying much, always noticing. One evening, she came in with chalk on her skirt and a crooked smile blooming on her lips. "Had a boy fall asleep during handwriting," she said. "He claimed it was because I have a peaceful voice." Silas looked up from his seat near the stove, amused. "Sounds like you're a menace in the classroom." I made him copy the alphabet standing up. He chuckled, low and warm, then tapped the chair beside him. "Sit. You've been on your feet all day." She hesitated, then crossed the room and settled into the chair, close enough their knees touched. He reached over and brushed a streak of white chalk from her cheek with the back of one finger. Her breath hitched, just once. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, About building onto the house come spring. She turned toward him, careful. What kind of building? Room for the children? Maybe a root cellar, enough space to keep things growing. Her voice dropped. That sounds like planning, he nodded. It is. She searched his face. You're sure? I was sure the day you asked to follow me home. Delaney didn't answer, not right away. But then she leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, her voice small but certain. Then I'll stay. By the time December settled deep into the valley, the land wore white like a habit. Snow drifted high along the fence posts, and the creek moved silent beneath its frozen sheath. The house stayed warm from dawn to dusk, wood stacked high in the corner, windows thick with frost, lamplight slanting gold across the walls. Delaney rose early, earlier still than she had when she first arrived. She moved through the quiet morning with a sure rhythm now, lighting the stove in the dark, setting bread to rise with her hands still chilled from sleep. Her coat hung by the door, worn but clean, and beside it, a new one, a heavier canvas lined with shearling that Silas had left without a word. She had found it folded on the chair one morning, a slip of note paper pressed beneath it bearing no writing at all. He was like that, steady, wordless in the ways he gave. A week before Christmas, Nalan came down with a cough low in his chest. Delaney kept him wrapped in blankets by the fire, a kettle always on, but when the fever rose, she sent Naomi to fetch Silas from the north pasture. He came at once, boots wet, jaw lined with worry. He won't keep water down, she said, crouching by Nalan's pallet. Silas knelt beside her. I'll ride to the Gunderson place. Their eldest married a midwife out of Butt. She'll know what to do. Delaney didn't argue. She tucked another quilt around Nalan and pressed a cloth to his brow while Silas saddled the mule and set off into the gray cold without so much as a pause. He returned the next morning with a woman in her 30s, cheeks red from wind, hair tucked under a wool cap. She carried a satchel of dried herbs and a bottle of something sharp enough to sting the air when she opened the stopper. Delaney stepped aside and let her work, kneeling only when the woman asked for help holding the boy still. By nightfall, Nalan's fever began to break. The midwife left before first light, leaving instructions and a packet of dried thyme. Delaney sat up through the night beside his pallet, brushing his hair back, her hand never leaving his. When Silas came in with breakfast, she looked up at him, eyes ringed with exhaustion, but calm. He's going to be all right, she said. Silas set the tray down and crouched beside her. You didn't sleep. I couldn't. He studied her face, then reached for her hand. You don't have to hold it all on your own. She didn't answer right away. Her fingers curled around his and she leaned in, resting her forehead against his shoulder. I know, she whispered. That night, with Nalan breathing easier and Naomi asleep beside him, Delaney stepped into the barn where Silas was brushing down the mare. She crossed to him in the low light, her hands tucked into her sleeves. You ever have anyone sick like that before? She asked. Only my brother after a fall one winter. Broke his ribs, took weeks before he could stand up straight. You were younger then. He nodded, not stopping his rhythm. Didn't know much, just did what I could. She watched him groom the horse, the soft rasp of the brush steadying something in her. You rode all night for help, she said, didn't think twice. That's what I mean. She stepped closer. You don't hesitate. Some things are worth moving fast for. She reached for the brush, their hands brushing. Let me. He let her take it, watching as she worked the mare's flank. You're good with her, she listens, like her rider. Silas leaned against the stall post, arms loose at his sides. His voice was quieter then. I saw you with Nalan, the way you never left his side. It wasn't just care, it was love. Delaney kept brushing, her movements slow. I didn't know I could love like that again. He stepped forward, close enough she could feel his warmth. You can. She turned to face him. You too, you carry it quiet, but it's there." He didn't speak, only reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers gentle. "I never thought I'd want to be looked at like this again," she said. "I never thought I'd find someone who didn't ask me to be anything but who I already am." Her breath caught. "I've been waiting to feel safe." "You are." They stood there, the snow whispering against the roof, the horses settling behind them, and then he kissed her slow, certain, the kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything but gave everything. She answered it without fear. Afterwards, she rested her forehead against his chest. "Will you still build that room come spring?" He wrapped his arms around her. "I'll build whatever you need, Delaney." She closed her eyes. "Then build something we can all grow old in." And he held her there in the quiet of the barn, while the snow kept falling outside, soft, steady, sure. The sun returned slow that winter, lingering low and pale over the hills, but the light was steady, and that was what mattered. By mid-January, the worst of the cold had passed. Nolan was back on his feet, leaner but smiling, his cough a fading memory. Naomi had taken to reading aloud from the Bible in the evenings, her voice gaining confidence. Delaney taught through the season, walking to the schoolhouse with the children each morning while Silas managed the ranch and repaired what the cold had cracked. The days had a rhythm now, not ease exactly, but something better. Something earned. Inside the house, they'd rearranged the rooms. Silas moved a spare cot into the barn and gave his space over to Naomi and Nalan, while Delaney took the front room. He didn't push for more than she offered, but the line between them had softened. Some nights they stayed up talking by lamplight, her chair pulled close to his. Other nights, he'd brush her hair out with his fingers, slow and quiet, as she leaned back against his knees. One night, as February pressed in with another snow, Delaney brought in a bundle wrapped in cloth from the schoolhouse. She laid it across the table. "The children made these," she said. "I thought you'd want to see." Silas opened the bundle and found small stitched squares, each made from scraps of old clothes. Some were uneven, the thread puckered, but others showed a careful hand. Names were embroidered in crooked letters, Naomi's, Nalan's, and the rest of the students, who now followed Delaney's voice like it was gospel. "They're making a quilt," she said. "I told them we'd hang it in the schoolhouse when it's done." Silas ran his fingers over one square. "They're proud of it, I can tell. They're proud of themselves." Delaney folded her arms, watching him. "I wasn't sure they'd take to me, but they did." "They didn't take to you," he said. "They trusted you. There's a difference." She looked down. "I keep wondering when someone's going to come and take it all away." He turned toward her. "Who would?" "I don't know. Life, maybe." He stepped closer. "Then we'll hold on tighter." The next morning they rode out together to check the far fences. Delaney rode beside him, wrapped in the coat he'd given her, her hair hidden under a scarf. They crossed the frozen creek and moved along the ridge, where the snow had begun to melt in patches. The ground was soft beneath the hooves, and the air smelled faintly of thawing pine. At the southern border of the property, they found one of the fence posts cracked and leaning. Delaney dismounted and examined the break. "Looks like wind took it," she said. "Won't hold come spring." Silas brought over a spare post from the pack mule and set to digging. Delaney knelt beside him, steadying the wire as he worked. "You ever think about putting up a barn here?" she asked. He looked over. "You thinking of staying that long?" "I'm thinking we already are." He smiled at that small, but the kind that settled deep. "Then it's worth building." They worked in rhythm, silent but sure. When they finished, Delaney leaned back on her heels and wiped her hands on her skirt. "I never thought I'd build anything with someone again," she said. "Not like this." "Neither did I." That night they sat together in the quiet, the fire low, the house humming with sleep. Delaney held a piece of fabric in her lap, stitching the last square of the quilt for the schoolhouse. She'd saved one corner for herself. Silas watched her finish the final seam, then asked, "What did you write on yours?" She turned the square toward him. It read simply, "Hope." He reached over and touched her wrist. "Delaney." She met his eyes. "I want you here, not just for now, not just because it's winter. I want your name on this land beside mine." She didn't answer with words. She set the quilt aside and leaned forward, threading her fingers through his. Her forehead rested against his, her breath soft. "I've already chosen you," she whispered. "That square, Hope, it's because of you." They married in March, under the budding cottonwoods behind the house. Reverend Pike came, as did the children from the schoolhouse, and a handful of neighbors who'd come to know Delaney not as the woman with a shadowed past, but as the one who taught their young ones to read and face the world with open hands. Naomi picked the first wildflowers of the season and tucked them into Delaney's hair. Nolan stood beside Silas, chin high. The vows were simple, spoken without flourish but with the kind of weight that holds through storms. Silas built the new room that spring, with Delaney at his side framing walls, sanding planks, choosing where the windows would face. She insisted on one that looked east, to catch the morning light. By summer, the harvest was good and the schoolhouse quilt hung on the wall, its bright squares a testament to hands that had learned to make something lasting. Naomi learned to ride. Nolan learned to carve. The house grew louder, warmer, filled with the kind of sounds that come from living forward instead of back. Delaney planted herbs by the porch and read aloud in the evenings with her feet in Silas's lap. He built her a bookshelf. She made him a jacket when the weather turned. They argued sometimes over the best way to seed a field, or how many hens to keep, but they always met in the kitchen afterward, bare hands brushing, laughter low between them. They didn't speak of the past anymore. They didn't need to. It lived behind them, quiet and buried, like winter under spring. What mattered was what they built. A home with walls that held fast, a fire that never burned out, and a love that stayed not because it was easy, but because it had been chosen, day by day, with hands and hearts both worn and willing. And when the wind came again, as it always did, it found the house full of warmth and laughter, and two souls who'd weathered enough to know that peace, once earned, could be kept.